Thanks for the introduction. I'm Martin Fahey. I'm the head of sustainability for Mitsubishi Electric UK and Ireland. Obviously, we're a very big beast, so I have responsibility for UK and Ireland. I have spent my entire working life really in HVAC. I started as a refrigeration apprentice in 1985. I know I don't look that old, but yeah, I am. So that's when I started. And like some of you in the room who are in that industry, it sort of grabs you and you end up in it, you know. So I've been in and around it for a long, long time now. Manufacturers, contractors, lots of different facets of that industry. And the whole sustainability angle, I found myself in my 18 years now with Mitsubishi Electric. Over that time, we started to look at it a lot more about, you know, where we wanted to be. And we called it at the time about just being part of the conversation. That was how we wanted to do things. Little did I know then, 10, 15 years ago, just how big this would become as a subject. And now it takes all of my time. So your road to net zero. And as I say, there'll be different levels of knowledge in the room, so I won't assume anybody knows anything. I'm sure you've heard of Mitsubishi. If you haven't necessarily heard of Mitsubishi Electric, but we're 100 years old as a business now. We've had a mission since day one, really, to be part of society and trying to do good for society. Back then, in 1921, there was this move to electrification of a lot of things. And funnily enough, 100 years later, we find ourselves on that similar journey now of electrification and where we can move things. And I'll talk about heat a little bit more in a moment. So this is why we're all in this room, and this is why you've chosen this session, hopefully. We have an imperative to change. We know enough now that it's our activity as human beings that is having an adverse effect on the globe. Cleverer people than I, and a lot more people than me, the latest UN report had 600 scientific contributions to it to ascertain where we are on this warming path. So how do you take, you know, a massive subject like that and distill it into, you know, day-to-day lives for us, because we're all out doing our thing? How do we explain that? Well, Ed Hawkins at University of Reading came up with this show your stripes way of doing it. And it very clearly shows from 1850 through to today, the world is getting warmer. And as I say, the experts are telling us it's our activity, it's everything that we're doing, which is driving this change. It's not solely what we're doing, but most of it is the impacts that we are creating as a society. So again, who's telling us? Well, Paris 2015 is when you may have seen the images. That's when they were up and jumping and shouting and whooping and hollering to say that they'd at least got some agreement. I went up to the COP event in Glasgow last year. They're just gathering again now at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. I didn't get an invite to that one. But Glasgow's beautiful. You know, I was quite happy to go to Glasgow on the train. But then, you know, Paris 2015 is when they got 190 odd signatories to say, yeah, okay, we accept the science, we need to do something about this. And this is when this discussion of 2 degrees, 1 degree, 1.5 degrees of warming started to come in, and that all stems back to Paris. And so the United Nations has a framework around this and is looking at this regularly and puts out reports. And it's that latest report, UN report, I think the 6th one that I'm referring to, that had something like 600 plus technical and scientific contributions to it. So bringing that global scale challenge to the UK, the Paris Agreement said we need to keep global temperature rise to below 2 degrees and preferably to no more than 1.5 degrees. Now, at this point, I normally explain, you know, these are nuances. 0.5 degree wouldn't mean anything to you or me. It means an awful lot if you're a a coral, a forest, a particular species somewhere. And these minute shifts have global scale impacts. So that's why we're seeing the extremes that we're seeing now. And what they left with Glasgow was with this phrase of, let's keep 1.5 alive, because I think the latest science is telling us we're something at 1.2 now. So, you know, finite amounts, but we're marching towards, and I haven't got the slides here to show you on that, but if you go away and look it up at what's the difference between 1.5 and 2? What's the difference between 2 and 3? It starts getting really, the multipliers start kicking in, and it'll probably keep you up at night. So what does that look like for the UK? Well, every country who's signed up at Paris is required to review their plan and their actions. I think it's every 5 years, and Glasgow fell as the latest time when they had to do that. They call it a ratcheting mechanism, easy for you to say. So off the basis of us hosting this here in Glasgow, the UK government came up with its nationally determined contribution, and for the first time ever included aviation and shipping into that. And what I can tell you here is unless, assuming you haven't all been out and read this stuff, but I'm sad enough to do that, that's genuinely a leading position out there in the world. What we've now got to do is go out there and do it. I suppose it's relatively easy to plan, to make a pledge, but we've done that first bit, and we've got to get out there now and get it done. So what is net zero? Let's all agree what it actually is at the moment. And when they're talking about phrases like net zero on BBC Breakfast, you know, things have moved on somewhat, haven't they? So it's fair, I think it's fair for us all to agree what we're talking about here. This is a favourite of mine to use to explain this. This is straight lift out of the Committee on Climate Change's report on net zero and how we as a country can end our adverse contributions to this temperature rise. If you look at all the emissions today on the left, huge mixed bag, everything we do. We've travelled here today, we're eating, some of us are staying, some of us are having a drink later, we're travelling back. All of that has an impact. Yeah, it can't not have. So we're all trying to make positive changes in our own lives, I'm sure, but at the moment, a huge mixed bag of emissions on the left. Now, if that column on the left was scaled in a different way, and it said, this is the emissions from buildings, just to bring it closer to what we're interested in perhaps more as a room, regardless of what you're doing in that building, living in it, working in it, playing in it, that would be somewhere around 30% of the total of the emissions would be shown there. That's why, that's understood, that's why building regs are always being looked at, that's why, you know, lots of concentration. It'd be second only to transport if you phased it. In fact, sometimes it's ahead of transport, depending on the figures that you look at. We need to move from that position by 2050, mid-century at the latest, to the position on the right there. So that's everything that we do. Everything we eat, how we travel, how we make things, how we do presentations, the furniture we choose, every single facet of our lives, whether you're a country, whether you're a company, or whether you're a citizen within that, is going to be affected on this journey to net zero. A colleague of mine coins a phrase which I often steal, which is net zero is a destination without a map. So we know where we need to be. 2050 at the latest be net zero. And I'll explain what net is at the moment. I don't know how many more times I can say net in one sentence. And but depending on whether you're a big company, a small company, a manufacturing company, a consumer, you know, a restaurant, that journey is going to be different. So, but we know where we need to be, but how are we going to get there? So again, just a couple of more slides to explain for net zero, which I stole from my colleague who's in the room, so hopefully I explained them properly. You can be carbon neutral. This phrase is used a lot, and that's a good thing. So you can measure your emissions, and then you can offset those emissions. Yep, offset via an approved scheme. Tree planting is very popular, or absorb a requisite amount of, the same amount that you're emitting. Now, that would get you to a carbon neutral point. It wouldn't get you to a net zero point. Net zero goes a bit further. So net zero means driving down your energy use in the first place as a first. Yeah? And then when that meets that growing line of renewable generation, the UK is a genuine leader in generating our electrical power from renewable sources, then you will have achieved net zero. Even at that point, you will be emitting something, can't be emitting nothing, but we'll be emitting an awful lot less, and then we will have the ability to offset that last bit, if you like, and then we will have achieved what we're setting out to do. So fair for you to look at us and say, well, that's great. So what are you as a company doing? Well, we've just, as you saw from slide 2, I think, we've just celebrated our 100th anniversary as a business. So we're used to planning out long term. So we've got our environmental sustainability vision 2050. We have stated that we will be net zero by that time. We have that substantiated by a body called Science-Based Targets, which look at people's plans and say whether or not if you achieve that plan, you will do what the science tells you we need to do to keep those targets those temperature limits not being broken. And we've got independent third-party oversight at a global scale from a body called CDP. So those are 3 key things that you need to have hopefully some credibility in this. A long-term plan, be doing some planning around what the science tells you need to do, and have some third-party oversight that you are actually doing what you say you're doing. And we, like many other companies nowadays, look at this through the lens of environmental, social, and governance. The new name for CSR, I suppose, for us who've got a bit of snow on the roof. So, the Sustainable Development Goals. So, materially, how do we then break that down? It's a huge subject. So, we've got different strands of what we're trying to achieve. And we've looked at what does that mean for us through another lens, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've settled on 5, which are key for us. But when you go through this all the way, I'm sorry, I thought that was going to do another thing. When you go all the way through this to the culture that you actually need to change this, and as someone clever and I said in the past, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So when you're actually trying to change things for the better, it's actually everything that the Sustainable Development Goals that comes into play. So there's lots of guidance out there, too much for me to go through with you today. You can go away with your favoured search engine and find all of this, but I'll just point out a couple. We have generated some of ours, so blatant plug there. You will find that on our digital library. Letty have done some amazing work in this regard. Science-based targets have got a defined way of stating that you've got a science-based net zero goal. UK Green Building Council, amazing work on this and a long, long history with it. They're real experts in it and have put out free knowledge resources for that for you to go and look at. And Reba, for the architects in the room, have done an awful lot of work in this regard. So, and I could have another 2 or 3 slides with examples of the front pages, but the short answer there is there's a lot out there about this. So go away, consume it, engage with it, and try and understand what it means for you and your business on this journey. And one of the things that this is driving from a manufacturer's point of view is a discussion about whole life carbon. We and the other manufacturers I'm sure you will speak to today and ongoing, we've spent a lot of our history talking about the operational phase of a piece of equipment. when you buy a piece of equipment from us or another manufacturer, you're getting an ownership phase for that. You've bought a quality piece of kit, it's going to consume this amount of power through its life, it's going to be reliable, and it's going to last this sort of length of time. And we have spent a lot of time working on the operational phase, and we will continue to do so, because if every 1%, 2% we can shave off the operational impact is ongoing and helpful to this. But now there's a discussion now, more of the discussion is around whole life carbon of products and the embodied, what's known as the embodied carbon of the equipment. And this is because that operational phase, if everybody here in this room and outside this room is doing their job, that operational phase should be shrinking. Buildings should be getting more efficient, therefore they need less kit from manufacturers like us to actually offset and deliver a comfortable, profitable, sustainable internal space. And we'll talk a little bit about the futures of offices and that in a bit. So as that section is shrinking, not in importance, but in the whole of the pie, if you see, then the embodied elements become ever more important. All those materials that it took to build that building, to put the mechanical equipment in that building, and those are becoming a really important topic out there. So we, like many others, have spent a lot of time on this and in generating this sort of data so that you can take this data or at least understand what does that actually mean. And we take that and turn that into the common currency of a kilogram of CO2. CO2 is the way all of this is measured. So 2 examples here. So on the left, our Losnay product, a mechanical heat recovery and ventilation product. And that has, when you calculate all of the embodied elements, so that's, we call this cradle to grave. So all the raw materials, all the manufacturing, all the shipping, all the uses phase, and then ultimately the end of its life, hopefully you recover those materials and make something else out of it. We're not, there's a linear economy: extract, make, use, throw it away. Recycling economy, the 3 R's, is, you extract, you make something, you use it, you recycle it. We're in a circular economy phase of things, or at least we should be. When we come to the end of life, we should be pulling those materials back and making something else with them, whether it's another mechanical heat recovery ventilation unit, or whether it's a chiller, like on the right-hand side there. Now, that comes out, I can't quite read that from there, I think it says 435 kilograms of CO2 equivalent for that product. Now, you'll be able to take that, you'll be able to punch that into your software, your measurement tools on the projects that you're dealing with. So I didn't want to just hover around with that one, because that's a relatively small number, but it's the number. Whether it's small or big in relation to what it is to move that much air, who knows? I mean, that's what the calculation comes out at. But that will help us in our engineering decisions moving forward. So then a bigger machine on the right there, a bigger chiller. Now that uses refrigerant, so that has an impact. Now the hours that I've spent, and not just me, more importantly, the engineers that we have in our business on this discussion about refrigerants. If you have refrigerant in a piece of equipment, this methodology assumes some of it will leak. Right? Now, we all know that, and we all try and turn out a piece of equipment, especially a hermetically sealed piece of equipment like that isn't the case. But the methodology says you have to assume some of that refrigerant will leak, and also that some of that refrigerant won't be recoverable at the end of its life. Therefore, it's going to have an impact. And the darker part of the section, we decided to show that separately to be completely transparent about what the refrigerant impacts are. So that's why you'll see manufacturers like us and other manufacturers are putting a lot of R&D effort into different types of refrigerants with lower global warming impacts, lower volumes. For us, that's like with HVRF, for example, where you can achieve the same VRF benefit, but with a lower refrigerant and overall embodied impact. So what does this mean in your region? We went off around the country and talked in different regions about the issues that, how does this manifest about where you are? Now, you will have all travelled from all four corners of the country, I'm sure, but seeing as we were in London, I thought I'd just pull through some of the slides that we used when we were in London. And if you've got a specific question on any particular region, I know just the man to point you to. Don't I, Chris? So, but yeah, Greater London, you know, a big footprint made up of lots of boroughs. 28 of the 32 boroughs have declared a climate emergency. So I suppose they get it. They go, yeah, we understand we're part of this journey and we need to make some changes. So the local authorities have made these declarations. And when you look at their net zero declarations, I've talked to you there about achieving net zero by mid-century latest, 2050. Lots of them have done that, are saying we're going to do that sooner. And I've got another example of a huge user in a minute that is saying the same sort of thing. So there's a bit of a, you know, there's a bit of a race going on with this, because some of this is around the corner, 2025, you know, it's around the corner. These are huge aspirations that have been set. And if you are working in that area, in that borough, you know, on a project that will affect you, because you will have to demonstrate how you're helping them to achieve those targets. It requires the writing of climate action plans. Lots of the boroughs are ahead with this one. I think if I'm reading that right, 27 have published their plans, so the vast majority have done this. And when you go around the country, there's different levels of how they've achieved this. Some are a bit further behind and some in fact, are a bit further ahead. Because we're in London, everything has an overarching, has to point towards the London plan, about how that plan can operate and be achieved within that. The boroughs have flexibility within the plan, but the plan is the overall thing that is driving this. So that's setting the backstops, if you like, which is pretty ambitious. And you will see this around different parts of the country as well, whether in the northwest, whether in Birmingham, whether in Scotland, etc. So net zero for major developments. Some of you may have seen this, the be lean, be clean, be green methodology. So lean, use as, you know, that's your efficiency point. That's that red line that you saw earlier. Drive that red line down. Consume as little energy as you can. I did a bit of talk yesterday, and one of the phrases I used is the cheapest and cleanest unit of energy you will ever is the one that you never use. So do your best to just not need to consume energy in the first place. Then be clean, you know, choose your energy supplier and how are you going to drive that. And then use renewable technologies, more efficient technologies. Stop burning things, use heat pumps. And then there's a new section in here because we're talking about net zero. Then when you've done all of those things, then you can offset what you've got left, because you will still have the need to offset. So let's leave an area as big and as impactful as it is as London and just look at one user. So the NHS have said we will be net zero by 2040 for all the emissions that are in our direct control. 8 years away, 7 years away really, not far off. And if those emissions aren't directly in our control, which will be a vast amount, you think of the supply chains upstream and downstream for the NHS. We want all of that to be net zero by 2045. So the latest backstop that they're saying is 5 years earlier than what the UN reports are telling us to do. A vast undertaking, to say the least. They're the second or third biggest employer in the world, aren't they? They say. Beaten only by, what is it, the Chinese Army and Indian Railways or something like that. But they, you know, it's a huge undertaking, but they've not shirked from it. So any of you working for the NHS, I'm sure there'll be some of you in the room, this will be part of the discussion that you're either already in or you'll be asked to be part of. So key point there really is, we can't ignore this. This is coming down the line. We need to work together. I mean, collaboration is key because no one company, no one sector, certainly no one person, if it's me you're looking at, has got all these answers because they just haven't. So let's look at heat specifically. I mentioned heat earlier on. What would net zero look like to generate heat? We're a huge consumer of energy. We consume a huge amount of energy in this country for our heating demand, as this diagram shows. So 23% of all emissions is due to our demand for heat in buildings. It's just in the UK. And then that breaks that down: homes, commercial, public. And you can see the millions of tons equivalent that we're talking here. I was showing you 435 kilos earlier for one product. This is this is what it actually looks like when you start breaking this down. So, application for heating is going to change. There'll be an awful lot of the one-on-one heating solutions, as there still is today. That will happen. But in heat-dense areas, there's a lot of heat mapping going on. I think you'll see a lot more sharing and a lot more interaction on how we provide heat and what that looks like from a community point of view. When are you a net consumer for heat? When are you a net exporter for heat? And when you look at a community and the mix that's in that community, a school, a swimming pool, the residential, data centres increasingly, hospitals and medical centres, they all have different demands at different times. But when you join all of those things together, you can do some impressive things. So a possible vision for the future there, as I said, so we've got residential apartments, we've got shops, we've got hotels, restaurants, offices, all wanting heat, some of them wanting cooling. And how are we going to do that? Well, there's a lot of talk now about fifth generation networks, almost ambient temperature distribution of heat. And then you've got a heat pump that can lift or even lower those temperatures locally for when you need them. So what could this market look like? Well, the Committee on Climate Change again is saying by 2050, it's electrification. 52% of heat demand they anticipate will come from heat pumps directly. Another 42% from district schemes, similar to the ones that I mentioned, showed you in the previous slides. 5% from hydrogen boilers, and 1% from direct electric heating. Because by that time, our grid should be, if not totally, almost totally a renewable generated supported grid by that time. So that's what the figures are saying. Now, hydrogen, it might be worth dwelling on hydrogen a little bit because you might think that seems a small number, especially a lot of the press that's being talked about around hydrogen. That's because hydrogen certainly got its place, but true green hydrogen is going to be such a valuable resource, but when we get hold of it in the volumes that we need it, that things like heavy shipping, aviation, heavy industry is going to need that truly green hydrogen by that time, especially when you've got technologies today that can be applied today, such as heat pumps. So it's a general electrification of wherever you can, and stop burning stuff. That's the catch-all phrase that somebody else has used, not me. Well, I've used it just now, but So, what does that look like for offices? Well, we've created a white paper as part of a discussion topic on this. I think we all have a different relationship with offices now than we did pre-pandemic. It certainly dragged us kicking and screaming into modern life because we were very much a be at your desk by a certain time type of company. I mean, we were. So work patterns are changing. Office space is changing and how we use it, and that all feeds into building services and net zero. It's as simple as that. So as I say, another shameless plug really, but go away and download the white paper. I mean, A white paper, by definition, is to create a discussion. So, these are just our thoughts in there. But it would appear working from home was moving as a trend before the pandemic. There's reports out there that were saying it was on the rise before we'd even heard of this thing called COVID. But there's a discussion. I mean, are we adequately measuring the energy that we're all using at home rather than going and sitting in the office and using their energies? There's a discussion to be had there. And there was a survey of 3,000 workers, and this is the probably the most obvious point you're going to hear today, which is, how do you prefer working in the office 2 days or less a week? 78% said yes. Yeah, Mondays and Fridays, not so good. Not so good when you go into the office. So hybrid working, hub and spoke working, a lot of downsizing going on. I'm sure you'll experience this, but all of this into planning. Well, the reason why we're mentioning it is with these net zero aspirations in mind. If you don't need to carry that level of estate to operate effectively, that's going to help you a lot on this journey. So it's about, I suppose I could go one step even further back. It's about smart technologies in smarter buildings, all connected to turn into smarter cities. Somewhat of a glib statement to finish on, but that's the direction that we're going. I said earlier on it was about collaboration for us in this room, but it's also, as we move forward, about buildings becoming more intelligent and us working together and buildings working together. So last slide to finish. We need to engage. If you have, work together, collaborate, go out, look for all the resources that are out there. If you haven't already started, measure what your impacts are. What do they actually mean for you? Are you a big company, a small company? What does that look like upstream and downstream in your supply chain? So upstream is all the things that are coming to you. Downstream is all the things that you're doing out. Look for that advice that I suggested earlier. And I started with collaborate, and I'll make no apologies for finishing with it, because nobody's got all the answers, so we need to work together on this one. That's me. Thank you very much.